Hey there, ready for some cutting-edge data science?
Always.
Well, today we're going to take a deep dive into TOTEM.
Totem.
Yeah, it stands for Tokenized Time Series Embeddings. It's this new method for analyzing time series data.
Okay.
And we've got a research paper and even a YouTube video explaining how it all works.
Sounds pretty thorough.
It is. We're talking things like weather patterns, stock prices,
Hmm.
even, stuff like your heart rate.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And get this, TOTEM aims to be a generalist.
A generalist.
Yeah, meaning it can analyze all sorts of time series data,
Okay, so not just
not just one specific thing, right? And it can do different tasks too,
like what?
like forecasting or anomaly detection. Really interesting stuff.
Interesting. So is that unusual for time series models?
Yeah, I mean, usually these models are more like spellists. They're trained, just for a specific type of data or task.
Ah, I see.
But TOTEM wants to be like a jack of all trades.
I like that. Makes it a lot more versatile.
Right, and powerful.
Yeah.
The paper actually uses a really good analogy in Figure 1A.
Okay.
It compares it to like a specialist doctor, like a cardiologist,
Okay, yeah.
versus a general practitioner. The cardiologist is the expert on hearts, obviously. But the GP, they can handle a wider range of health issues.
Right, right. I get it.
So that's kind of what TOTEM's going for.
Interesting.
And this generalist thing is like super important in the real world.
Oh, how so?
Well, because new data is popping up all the time.
Right. Always new data.
And TOTEM, it's supposed to be able to like adapt and analyze data it hasn't even seen before.
Wow.
They call it zero-shot testing.
Ooh, that sounds tough.
It is. It's in Figure 1B of the paper if you want to see it. But imagine like taking a test on a subject you never even studied.
Oof, yeah. I don't think I'd do so well.
Me neither. But maybe you've learned like some general problem-involving skills, right? Things that could help you figure it out.
I see.
So that's kind of what TOTEM's doing. It's got these general skills for time series data.
Interesting approach. But how does that actually work, like technically?
Well, the idea is to represent time series data as a sequence of like these discrete tokens.
Tokens.
Yeah. It's similar to how language models work with words, actually.
Okay.
So instead of analyzing the entire time series as like one big chunk,
Mm-hmm.
TOTEM breaks it down into these individual tokens. And each one represents a specific pattern in the data.
So it's like instead of listening to the whole song at once,
Yes,
you're paying attention to the individual notes.
exactly. And that tokenization, that's what they call it, it lets TOTEM understand the structure of the time series in a more nuanced way.
Okay, I'm following so far.
Good. And to do all this, TOTEM has to learn this like fixed vocabulary of patterns
From the data itself.
directly from the data, yeah?
Wow.
Pretty neat, right? And the paper says it does this in a self-supervised way,
Self-supervised, meaning
meaning it doesn't need labeled examples. It's like
learning a language by just being immersed in it,
yeah, exactly.
instead of just like memorizing vocab lists.
That's a great way to put it.
That's pretty amazing.
Right. It's a huge advantage because unlabeled data, well, there's tons of it.
It's everywhere.
Exactly. Like way more readily available than labeled data.
Makes sense. So it's like learning a language just by living in like a foreign country,
Yeah.
interacting with people rather than just, studying a textbook. You pick things up more naturally that way.
Exactly. So ready for the techie part?
Hit me with it.
Okay, so the paper says TOTEM's tokenizer uses this thing called a vector quantized variational autoencoder,
Okay.
or
all right.
VQVAE for short.
VQVAE. Got it.
Section 3.2 gets into the nitty-gritty, but can you break it down for us?
Sure, I can try. Imagine you have a box of like different colored building blocks.
Okay.
Each one represents a specific pattern in the time series data, right?
Right.
The VQVAE learns how to use these blocks to construct a model,
Hmm.
and that model represents the shape of the time series.
Oh, okay.
It's basically learning a set of code words for different patterns in the data.
Ah, okay. So like compressing the information into a code using these building blocks.
Yeah, you got it.
The YouTube video actually does a nice job visualizing it.
Oh, cool. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's worth a watch. But what's also interesting is that TOTEM focuses on temporal tokenization,
Temporal tokenization. What's that?
meaning it captures how the data changes over time, not just across like different sensors or examples.
I see. So why is that important?
Well, the paper says it's crucial for generalization
Okay.
because it lets TOTEM work with, what's it called? Multivariate data, data from multiple sources.
Right, right.
And the number of sources, that can even change over time.
I see.
So like imagine we're analyzing the stock market. TOTEM can pick up on trends over time regardless of how many different stocks we're tracking.
Interesting. So not limited by the number of variables involved.
Nope. Super versatile.
This all sounds really impressive, but how do we know if it actually lives up to the hype?
Well, that's what the paper's for. They put TOTEM to the test. They evaluated it on, like, a bunch of tasks.
Oh, like what?
Like imputation, anomaly detection, and forecasting.
And how did it do?
Well, we'll get into all that, but first, quick break.
All right, sounds good. So we've been looking at this totem thing. It's a new way to analyze time series data, right?
Right. And it's using this tokenization and self-supervised learning to be a real generalist.
Yeah, a real jack of all trades.
Exactly. Able to handle all sorts of time series data and different tasks.
And we saw how it can even deal with new data, stuff it's never seen before.
Right, the zero-shot stuff. Pretty impressive.
Definitely. But how about a little more detail on like how it actually works?
Sure, we talked about the tokenization stuff, breaking the data down into these little tokens.
Right, like the individual notes in a song.
Exactly. And that lets Totem understand the data's structure.
Okay. And it learns this vocabulary of pattern all on its own.
Yeah, without any labeled examples. Pretty cool, huh?
Super cool. But the paper also goes into some pretty technical details about how the tokenizer is designed.
Yeah, Section 3.3 gets into all that. I think it's important to, really understand that stuff.
Well, I think understanding those choices can give us a better appreciation for why Totem is so good.
Okay, let's try to break it down then, without getting too lost in the weeds. So the paper mentions that while Totem uses a VQVAE, its encoder and decoder are a bit different.
Right. Traditional models often use these dilated convolutions.
Dilated convolutions.
Yeah, they're good for high-frequency data, like audio. But for other time series data, maybe not the best fit.
I see.
It's like using the wrong tool for the job.
Yeah, exactly.
So Totem uses a stack of strided 1D convolutions instead. Makes sure it processes every single time step.
Carefully.
Yeah, regardless of how the data is sampled.
Ah, so no details too small.
Right, and then there's this REVIN thing, reversible instance normalization.
That's a mouthful.
I know, right? But basically, it helps Totem learn a smaller set of normalized waveforms. Makes it more efficient.
So it's like streamlining the learning process, focusing on the important stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
But does it, lose any information about the original data?
Nope, that's the whole thing. REVIN is reversible. You can reconstruct the original data if you need to.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. But I'm still a little fuzzy on how the tokenizer actually works, step by step.
Sure. So first, it takes a batch of univariate time series data.
Univariate.
Meaning data from a single source over time.
So temperature readings from one weather station over a week.
Exactly.
All right.
And then it flattens the sensor and example dimensions, basically makes one long sequence of data points. Then an encoder, which is a series of those strided convolutions we talked about, compresses the data temporally. Reduces its size, but keeps the important patterns.
So a summary of the data.
Exactly. A good analogy.
Cool. So what then?
That compressed data, that's the latent variable, and it gets quantized, meaning it's converted into a discrete representation using a codebook.
Ah, the building blocks.
Yep.
Okay.
The codebook has a fixed set of those blocks, each representing a specific pattern. Quantization finds the best match between the latent variable and the code words in the codebook.
So saying this part of the data looks like this pattern and this other part looks like that pattern?
You got it. It's translating the raw data into code words, essentially a sequence of them.
And then?
That goes to a decoder, which reverses the encoding process.
Ah, so it reconstructs the original time series.
Yep.
Neat.
And that reconstructed data can be used for, well, anything you need to do with time series.
Makes sense. But earlier we were talking about multivariate data. Data from multiple sources.
Right.
If the tokenizer is for univariate data, how does it handle that?
Good question. And the paper talks about this, temporal tokenization. It's the key to generalization.
Okay.
Instead of trying to tokenize across all the sensors at once, it focuses on the patterns within each source, individually.
So with our weather stations, it tokenizes each station's data separately?
Right. Gets a sequence of code words for each one.
And then you can just combine those representations.
Exactly. Like building a bigger structure from separate sets of blocks.
Ah, that's clever. Really adaptable. But does it actually work? In practice?
That's what the paper's all about. They evaluated Totem against other methods.
Like a competition?
Yeah, you could say that. They used 3 common tasks.
Which one?
Imputation, anomaly detection, and forecasting.
Okay.
And they used multiple data sets from different domains.
So a real test of its abilities.
Right, to make sure the comparison was fair and all that.
Solid. So first up, imputation. That's about filling in missing data, right?
Yep, like if a sensor breaks and misses some readings.
Got it.
You got to estimate those missing
You
values.
use the dots, exactly. And they compared totem to a whole bunch of other imputation methods, right?
Yeah, like 17 of them on 12 different data sets.
Wow, that's a lot. And how did they measure how well it did?
They used things like mean squared error and mean absolute error.
Error, so lower is better, right?
Right. Lower error means the imputed values are closer to the real ones.
Okay. And they tested it in both in-domain and zero-shot settings, right?
Of course. Always got to see how it does on new data.
Right. And what were the results?
Well, Totem did really well, often even better than the specialized methods.
Even in the zero-shot setting?
Yep.
That's wild. Like, it's using its general knowledge to fill in the gaps, even when it's new data.
Exactly. Shows how adaptable it is, not limited by the data it's seen before.
Very cool. Okay, what about the next task, anomaly detection?
Ah, yes. That's all about finding the weird stuff in the data.
The outliers.
Right. Stuff that doesn't fit the normal pattern, like a sudden spike in electricity use or a strange dip in stock prices.
So, like a security system for data.
Yeah, a good way to think about it.
And for this one, they tested totem against how many methods?
19 this time, and on 25 data sets.
Wow. They really wanted to put it through its paces, huh?
They did, and they used metrics like precision, recall, and F1 score.
Okay, break those down for me.
So precision is about how accurate the model is at finding the real anomalies. Recall is about finding all the anomalies that are actually there.
Okay.
And the F1 score combines those two into one overall measure.
So higher F1 score means better at both finding and identifying anomalies.
Exactly.
So how did totem stack up?
It did really well again, often better than the specialized methods, even in the zero-shot setting.
Wow. Consistent performer. It's like a security system that can learn new tricks. Pretty impressive.
Yeah, it really shows how adaptable Totem is.
Okay, on to the final task. Forecasting. This one seems super useful for the real world. You know, everyone wants to predict the future.
Oh, absolutely. Forecasting is all about predicting what comes next in a time series, based on its past, of course.
Right, like predicting tomorrow's weather or how a company's stock will do.
Exactly.
And in this paper, they focused on long-term forecasting, which is even harder, right?
Definitely. The further you look into the future, the more uncertain things get.
So how did Totem handle that challenge?
They compared it to 14 other forecasting methods on 12 data sets. Same deal, in domain and zero shot. And they use those same error metrics, MSE and MA.
Okay, so lower error means better prediction.
Right.
And drum roll, please.
Once again, Totem was a star performer. It held its own against the specialized models.
Even on new data.
Even on new data.
So Totem's a triple threat. It can do all three tasks really well. But why those three tasks? Imputation, anomaly detection, and forecasting. Why those specifically?
That's a good question. And they actually talk about this in the paper, section 4.4, task selection.
Oh, okay, what'd they say?
Well, they wanted to make sure the comparison was fair. You know, like with short-term forecasting, it's hard to compare models directly.
Why is that?
Different models might use different inputs and outputs, so it's like comparing apples and oranges.
Yeah, makes sense.
And for classification and anomaly detection, they wanted to avoid benchmarks that have problems, like data leakage.
Data leakage, what's that?
It's when a model might accidentally get information from the test set while it's training. Gives it an unfair advantage.
So like cheating on a test.
Exactly. They didn't want any of that.
So they chose these three tasks to keep things fair and square.
Right. They wanted to be sure that Totem was really better, not just because of some weird benchmark issue.
Good point. But does that mean Totem can't handle other tasks?
Not necessarily. They actually mentioned that later work showed Totem's good at classification too, when compared fairly, of course.
So Totem's got even more potential than we've talked about. We just need good benchmarks to test it properly.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've seen Totem can handle these three tasks really well. But what makes it so good? Is it the whole architecture, or is it something more specific?
Well, they explored that in section 6. They compared the tokenized representation to the patched representation.
Right, the patch totem thing.
Yep. They wanted to see if tokenization was really the key.
So like a head-to-head test.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, Totem, with its tokenized representation, it won every time.
Wow, so it's not just the general design, it's really the tokenization that makes the difference.
Seems like it.
Why do you think that is? What's so special about tokens?
Well, one idea is that tokens allowed Totem to capture more complex patterns. Like, it has a richer language to describe the data with.
Makes sense. A more detailed map, so to speak. But does it matter what kind of model you use to analyze the tokens?
Good question. They tested that too. They compared tokens and patches with 2 different downstream architectures, a transformer encoder and a simpler multi-layer perceptron.
Interesting. So is the benefit of tokenization tied to the transformer? Or does it hold up even with a simpler model?
Turns out, tokens won again, no matter which model they used.
So it's a fundamental advantage, not tied to a specific architecture. Cool.
Very cool. Really suggests that tokenizing time series data is the way to go.
Now, about the codebook size and dataset size stuff. Seems pretty intuitive, right? Bigger codebook, more patterns you can represent, more data, better the model learns.
Yeah, the ideas are straightforward, but the details are interesting. So for codebook size, they found that bigger codebooks meant lower reconstruction loss.
Meaning it represents the data better, right?
Right.
But is there a downside to just making the codebook huge?
Well, it makes the model more expensive to run, more patterns, more computing power needed.
Ah, so gotta find a balance. Big enough to be useful, but not too big to be slow and expensive.
Exactly.
Okay, what about dataset size?
Well, they found that the generalist model, trained on the most diverse dataset, did the best in zero-shot settings.
Makes sense. More variety in the training data, better it can handle new stuff.
Right, but they also compared two specialist models, one trained on traffic data, one on electricity data.
Okay.
The electricity model actually did better in the zero-shot setting, even though the traffic dataset was bigger.
So it's not just about how much data, but what kind of data.
Exactly. Quality over quantity, you could say.
Diversity is key. Like someone who's traveled all over is going to be more adaptable than someone who's just stayed in one place.
Perfect analogy.
So diversity matters for both the codebook and the data. Seems like a theme here. But does TOTEM, treat all data the same? Or does it learn different representations for different things?
Another great question, and they actually looked into that too. In the appendix, section 8.9, they visualized the codebooks.
Visualize them. What, drew pictures of the code words?
Well, not exactly pictures, but they created visual representations of the building blocks.
Okay. And what did they find?
TOTEM learns different code words for different domains.
So it's like a different language for each type of data.
You got it.
That's pretty amazing. But are there any code words that are shared across domains?
Actually, yes. Some are shared, some are more specialized.
So TOTEM's got both general and specific tools in its toolbox.
Exactly. It can capture the commonalities and the unique aspects of different types of data.
Wow, this is all really fascinating. But I think we're getting pretty deep into the technical weeds here.
You're right.
Let's step back for a second. What's the big picture here? Why does all this technical stuff matter?
Well, it's all about understanding time series data, right?
Right, but why do we care about that?
Time series data is everywhere. It's like the heartbeat of the world, weather, finance, even our own behavior.
Okay.
Being able to analyze it well, that's huge for pretty much every field. And TOTEM could really change how we do that.
So this isn't just some abstract research project.
Nope. TOTEM has real potential to make a difference.
That's exciting. So where do we go from here? What are the next steps?
Well, the paper talks about foundation models.
Foundation models, what are those?
There are these large pre-trained models. They've already learned a lot from a huge data set.
Okay.
We have them for language, like BERT and GPT-3.
Right, I've heard of those.
And for vision, like CLIP, they can understand images really well.
So they're saying we could have something like that for time series data.
Exactly. Imagine a pre-trained TOTEM. It's already learned from tons of diverse data. And then you could just fine-tune it for your specific task. No need to train a whole new model from scratch.
Oh, that would be super convenient and powerful.
Right. It would make time series analysis so much easier and open up all sorts of new possibilities.
Like having a whole team of time series experts ready to go.
Exactly. And it's part of this bigger trend, using self-supervised learning and transfer learning to build better models.
It's like those techniques are spreading from language and vision to other areas.
Right. TOTEM shows how well it can work for time series.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. It's been a real deep dive.
We have.
But before we wrap up, let's recap what we've learned, for our listeners.
Sounds good to me. Let's highlight those key takeaways. All right, so we've gone through all the ins and outs of TOTEM, looked at how well it does on all those different tasks.
And we even talked a bit about, how it could change the future of time series analysis.
Yeah, the potential for foundation models and all that.
Right. Pre-trained models that could revolutionize how we do forecasting, anomaly detection.
Really exciting stuff. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go back to the basics a bit. What makes TOTEM stand out?
Okay, back to the paper then. One thing that really struck me was how thorough their analysis was. They didn't just report some numbers and call it a day.
No, they really dug deep, tried to understand why TOTEM works so well.
Exactly. And one of the key things they found was that using a tokenized representation, it really made a difference.
Yeah, compared to the traditional patch representation.
Right. Remember patch totem? They basically put them head-to-head.
And TOTEM, with its tokenized approach, it consistently came out on top.
It's like tokenization lets totem, see those fine-grained patterns in the data. stuff that might get missed otherwise.
Like having a more powerful microscope, you can see things in more detail.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And they didn't just assume this was because of the transformer architecture, right?
Right. They tested it with a simpler model, too, the multi-layer perceptron.
Same result.
Same result. Tokens still won.
So no matter what model you use representing the data as tokens, it seems like it's just fundamentally better.
Yeah, it really does. It's about finding the right way to express the data, I guess, the right language.
Now, they also looked at the codebook size and the dataset size. Those things seem pretty straightforward, right?
Well, the concepts are, yeah, bigger code book, more patterns you can represent, more data, better the model should learn.
Right. But they actually found some interesting nuances there.
Oh, yeah. For the code book size, they saw that as it got bigger, the reconstruction loss went down.
So bigger codebook, better it represents the data. Makes sense. But there's got to be a downside, right? Can't just make it infinitely big.
Well, the bigger it gets, the more expensive it is to run. Computationally, I mean.
Ah, so it's a trade-off. Accuracy versus efficiency.
Exactly. Got to find that sweet spot.
Okay, and what about dataset size? What did they learn there?
Well, they found that the generalist model, the one trained on the most diverse data set, that one did the best in zero-shot settings.
Yeah, because it's seen more variety, so it's more adaptable to new stuff.
Right, but they also compared those two specialist models, remember, the traffic one and the electricity one.
Yeah, the electricity one actually did better, even though the dataset was smaller.
Exactly. So it's not just about the quantity of data, it's about the quality, the diversity.
A well-rounded education, so to speak.
Ha! I like that.
So Totem's success, it's really about this combination of things, right?
Yeah, it's the tokenization, the self-supervised learning, and this focus on diversity, both in the codebook and the data.
And all of this, it's not just like some theoretical stuff. It has real-world implications.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. Time series data is everywhere. Predicting natural disasters, optimizing energy use.
Understanding how the brain works.
Exactly. Totem could really change how we do all sorts of things.
And the researchers, they put their code on GitHub, so other people can build on their work.
That's great. It's like they're planting a seed that can grow into something even bigger.
Well said. Well, folks, that's our deep dive into Totem. We've gone through the technical details, the impressive results, and the exciting potential of this new approach to time series analysis.
We've talked about tokens, self-supervised learning, and the importance of diversity.
And hopefully we've sparked your curiosity about the amazing things happening in the world of data science.
Absolutely.
This field is always changing, so stay curious, keep exploring, and join us next time for another fascinating deep dive into the world of data. MCCI.